Andrew Lennon. Here he is.
Shall I start off again? Fuck off.
That's rude. I'm just going to ask you why you do what you do, Mr. Lennon, because you don't just act, you are also a nurse. So can you tell me just about your journey, how that came about?
It's been a fairly strange one, if I'm honest. I always wanted to be an actor ever since I was a really small kid. Never went away. I can't say with any certainty where that came from, because there's certainly nobody in the family that acted. I was almost like the performing monkey of the family, the oddity, the one that sings and dances and is very, very highly strung. Oh yeah, there was that too, and that's never really left me. Ever since I can remember, from the age of 3, 4, and probably since times I can't remember, it was always about the acting. That followed me through until I started meeting people like Anna Sher in London, then going on to do International Youth Theatre of Britain at the age of 16, right through to meeting you guys at the age, National Youth Theatre for me, I was pretty old when I did National Youth Theatre. I was 20 years old. It was kind of going to be my last attempt at getting in. So I was an adult by the time I joined National Youth Theatre. So nursing, I'd had brief flirtations. Now, there was something in my family. There were a lot of nurses. There were a lot of people that worked in hospital environments in my family. My late grandfather was a fairly senior administrator at the local hospital. There were nurses. So although I briefly flirted with the idea of becoming a nurse, it wasn't something I took particularly seriously until much later, until I was in my 30s. So it's been a fairly meandering path for me, if I'm honest.
What took you into nursing after acting?
Are we being really honest here? Yeah. It'll probably help us if we were. Right. I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, but yeah, I was about 30 years old, maybe a little younger, and a friend of mine was in his second year of training to become a nurse, and at that point I didn't have any aspirations to go into it at all, and it was literally a conversation that he had with me. I was driving him somewhere, I can't remember where, and he said to me, "Do you know what? You'd make a really good learning disabilities nurse." And sometimes people plant seeds and you just can't get rid of them. It literally was as simple as that. It was an idea that didn't go away. I mean, I'd always knew that I could be a caring person. I'd done some support work with people with learning disabilities. So I knew that it was something I could do. But going into nursing, up until that point, it wasn't something that I'd taken very seriously at all, if at all. But yeah, it was a very, very simple conversation with a friend that just said, "Do you know what? You'd make a really good learning disabilities nurse." An idea that wouldn't go away.
Hasn't the acting training helped you in nursing? Surely you're, for want of a better word, performing for people, making them happy, taking them out of their situation.
If I'm honest, I learned more about life from the first day of my training on the ward. I knew when I was dressed in that tunic on the first day back in 2003 that I would know from the first day of placement whether I could cut it as a nurse. And my wife said to me, "How do you know you're going to be suitable for it?" I says, "I'll let you know in an hour." And I went to a hospital on placement that's no longer there. It's called St Tidvilles. I went on a care of the elderly placement first and survived the first day. And many, many years later, I still do it part-time. But yeah, I knew fairly quickly that I could care for people. But in terms of how it affected the acting, I think they're mutually beneficial. You learn a lot about how, for me personally, you learn a lot about how sick a person can become and still want to carry on. That's the thing that stuck in my mind fairly early on. People don't just linger on. They kind of, a lot of people will hold on. You know, you've got the phrase, people hold on for dear life. And in many cases, I guess they do. It's astonished me just how unwell a person can become before they give themselves permission to go. That's not an area as a learning disabilities nurse that I visit very often. But, you know, there's good things as well. You see people getting better, and you see people learning skills that they've never had before or have lost. And that's more to do with the branch of nursing that I'm involved with. It's about skilling people. It's about making them more independent. So I don't tend to see a lot of the gritty, you know, the death and what a lot of the nurses in intensive care are having to deal with at the moment with the COVID pandemic. I don't see a lot of that.
You're bringing a lot of life to these people, aren't you? You're making them, you know, feel as comfortable as they can be.
It can get particularly stressful on occasions, and the gold standard of a nurse is when they can keep their cool and keep level-headed when everybody else is really, really frustrated. That's part of the reason that I never was ever interested in pediatric nursing. The thought of nursing sick children chills me, because it's very, very difficult to explain to a child that's in pain why you're doing the things that you're doing. So, you know, I made a good decision there, because I still at 47 years old don't think that I could pediatric nurse. I couldn't do that.
That would be a hard thing to do. I mean, I couldn't do it, and I take my hat off to you. I wasn't trying to be flippant or anything, because I think
No, I didn't think you were.
Nursing is probably one of the hardest professions, and acting pales into insignificance when it comes to people like you and the frontline nurses and doctors and everything like that. So I take my hat after that, and that's fantastic.
I'm surprised, actually, Paul, how many, you know, with a lot of the actors needing to go and find other sources of employment, I'm quite astonished how many of them have gone over into care and have been quite successful at it.
I think actors are caring in themselves, and they want to care. They want to, you know, care for others, or especially me. I'm talking probably my experience. You know, I like to care for people. I like to make sure everyone's all right. You know, I've done a lot of shows in nursing homes, and just to bring some joy to those people is absolutely fantastic. You know, the performance is secondary when you see, you know, what it brings to those people. It's just lovely.
When I mentioned earlier about the two professions being mutually beneficial to each other, I can take a lot from what I've learned about how to communicate back to nursing, but then a lot of what I've learned from nursing about human nature, about the range of emotions that people can feel or experience when they're very, very vulnerable, I can take that back to the acting. So it's very much a two-way communication there, which I've become more acutely aware of as I've got older. It's made the process of acting easier. I'm much more prepared to take risks with the work now.
You've gone back into acting, haven't you? You did give it up for a while.
Yeah, it was really weird. I always stayed in equity. I always sort of kept an eye on the business. Lots of things obviously changed. So I've always sort of been on the peripheries of it. I've always kept in touch with people. I've always known what's going on. But there was a point where I had to say, look, I'm not active at the minute, and I had to step back. That did eventually become an itch I couldn't scratch anymore, back about 5 years ago. But yeah, it became a real thorn in my side, to the point, you know, I mean, when you've crossed the line and you've gone and you're earning decent money or half decent money, and then you decide I have to go back to this, that's a big bloody step, really, because you know, and I know how precarious the business is. You're essentially leaving your security and going into the unknown.